Hello everyone, welcome back to Tony Bart Music. In today's video, we are diving deep into the world of audio compression and limiting. We start with the theory behind audio compression, go over the most important parameters you need to know, and then I show you how to use ReaComp, a stock compressor plugin in Reaper. After that, we'll explore limiters, and I'll give you a live demonstration with ReaLimit. In this video, I will be testing a half scripted and half demonstrational approach, which means that the explanatory parts will be scripted, where the demonstration parts will be live on a PC. For my sighted viewers, that means that you will not have any visuals on screen while I'm explaining, but you will have visuals as soon as it gets into the live demonstration. So, now that that is out of the way, let's get started. Compression. Compression is a fundamental audio processing technique used to control the dynamic range of a signal. The dynamic range is the difference between the loudest and quietest parts of the audio signal. A compressor reduces the volume of the loudest parts and sometimes even boosts the volume of the quieter parts of the signal, making the overall sound volume more consistent and polished. Think of a compression like an automated volume control. When the signal gets too loud, the compressor turns it down. When it's too quiet, the compressor can bring it up. This makes your audio more balanced and easier to listen to. Just think of the footage of a horror game, which is usually a game that lives from a high dynamic range. You've got parts where the player, let's imagine in Let's Play for example, the player will just stay quiet and the game audio will also be quiet throughout the gameplay because you're basically sneaking around and trying to find a way without getting spotted. And then, all of a sudden, the murderer shows up and tries to stab you with a knife. Usually, you will get a jump scare, which means a really loud sound that comes out of the blue. And here, the dynamic range is literally between the really quiet ambience and the really loud stabbing sound, or the murderer showing up, or you spotting the murderer and therefore screaming all loud, which means that this is the dynamic range. And in a horror game, this is actually expected behavior. You're playing with this. But in a typical YouTube video like this, you would want the quietest parts and the loudest parts to stay as close to each other as possible, because a huge dynamic range can also make people feel stressed out or uncomfortable. Let's therefore look into the parameters that a good and standard compression plugin usually comes with. The threshold sets the level at which the compressor starts to act. Any signal above that level will be compressed. The ratio determines how much compression is applied once the signal exceeds the threshold. A 4:1 ratio means that for every 4 decibels the input signal goes over the threshold, the output will only increase by 1 decibel. The attack time controls how quickly the compressor responds to signals that exceed the threshold. Faster attack times catch transients, while slower attack times let the initial attack of the sound through. The release time determines how quickly the compressor stops acting after the signal falls below the threshold. Short release times make the compression more noticeable, while longer release times provide a smoother sound. Since compression often reduces the overall level of the signal, makeup gain allows you to boost the output to match the input level. Well then, let's see ReaComp, a typical compressor, and the stock compressor for Reaper in action. ReaComp, just like any other stock Reaper plugin, can be downloaded individually. So if you're not working in Reaper, you can also download it. And it's called Replugs, which is the collection of all stock plugins available in Reaper from the Coco's website, reaper.fm. Here we are in my Reaper project, and
one demo recording, one item.
We've got one track, which is called demo recording. If we play it, it will peak at -1 decibels, just so that you know. Now, this is a demo recording where I'm talking at relatively normal volume. However, I can also whisper a tiny bit for you. And I can also get a little bit louder than usual. That is the recording, and that is where we want to apply Compression 2. To do that, we will select the track.
One demo recording, one item.
And press F to open the FX list.
FX. Track 1 demo recording dialog. List 1 list.
I've configured my Reaper so that it doesn't open the Add FX dialog automatically. If you've got the same situation like me right now, that you only got a list and you don't get the Add FX dialog automatically, press A.
Add FX to track 1 demo recording dialog filter.
And in here we will search for ReaComp.
REACOMP.
REACOMP. Down arrow.
List 1 list. VST. ReaComp. Cocos. 1 of 1.
Here we go. Instantiate it.
FX. Track 1 demo recording dialog dB threshold.
And I will cut the video short here because there's a lot of rambling going on now. Here's some information. All the parameters I mentioned earlier in the explanatory part are the basics of compression. There are more parameters to compression if you want to dive deep into advanced compression topics. Parameters like pre-compression or a knee or things like that. And those parameters are available in ReaComp too. However, I won't tell you what they do because this is really advanced stuff. And this video today is just meant to be an introduction to compression in general and how ReaComp and ReaLimit basically work. So we will just skip them and I will tell you whenever I skip a parameter. Press F6 to go into the FX window.
ReaComp grouping.
And press Tab.
Threshold dB slider plus 0.0.
This is the threshold slider. As usual within the Reaper interface, you always got a slider and an edit box. So if you press Tab,
threshold dB edit selected plus 0.0.
You will get an input box where you can type decibel values if you want. Now, my loudest peak is at -1 decibels right now, and my whispering goes down to, I think, setting this to -20 decibels should be fine, and you should be able to notice the difference here.
Threshold D minus 21.2.
Let's set it to -21.2. Let's tap a few times more.
Threshold envelope grouping pre-comp.
This is pre-comp, and as I said, we will just skip that.
Pre-comp attack MS slider 3.0.
This is attack, and attack with 3 milliseconds. That is what you can hear if you press tab once more.
Attack MS edit selected 3.0.
So it's 3 milliseconds, and that is really, really low. Usually 1 to 5 milliseconds is considered a fast attack, which means that it's meant to catch transients. This is usually not needed with vocals. We'd prefer a medium attack in that case, so I'd say I would set it to something like 10 to 20 milliseconds.
Attack 3.4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 14.8.
Yeah, let's put it to 14.8, which is something about 50 milliseconds, right? That's fine.
Attack and release MS slider 100.
The release with 100 milliseconds, it's okay, I guess. I would just shorten it a little bit.
86.55.
Let's put it to 55.
Release. Auto release checkbox not checked.
Auto release is an additional parameter.
Ratio 1, slider 4.00.
That is the ratio slider. So by default, it's set to 4 to 1. So as I've explained earlier, for every 4 decibels that goes over the threshold, the actual volume will be compressed down to just 1 decibel of increased volume. So that means that we lose a dynamic range of 3 decibels for every 4 decibels in the input signal that is above the threshold. We will leave that at where it is right now because this is a typical ratio for vocal compression.
Ratio 1 knee dB slider 0.0.
The knee, as I said, I won't touch on this today.
Knee detector input. Combo box main inputs collapsed.
This is especially useful if you're planning to sidechain a compressor. I think I've got a video mentioning it where I did this already.
Low pass HZ slider 20,000.
You can low and high pass the compressor.
Low pass, high pass, RMS size, MS, slider 5.0.
All of this is additional parameters.
RM output mixed grouping, wet, dB, dry, dB, wet, dB, dry, dB preview filter checkbox, auto makeup checkbox not checked.
And I'm just tabbing through this because this checkbox is really important. Auto makeup gain will automatically bring up the output volume so that it matches the input volume. That will make sure that the compressor actually doesn't compress all the louder peaks down and the signal will get overall quieter. This will make sure that the signal will automatically be raised in volume so that you get an overall louder signal. And we will check that.
Checked.
And now we will exit out of this.
Unsave.
And play. Now this is a demo recording where I'm talking at relatively normal volume. However, I can also whisper a tiny bit for you. And I can also get a little bit louder than usual. You can already notice the compression. You don't have this big gap between the quietest and the loudest parts anymore. Now that is exactly what I want. For exaggeration, I would just put the threshold really, really low so that you can hear what happens if you overcompress something drastically. Let's press P, which is a shortcut for the OSARA parameters dialog, and we get you to the settings and parameters of ReaComp much quicker.
FX parameters. ReaComp. 1 demo recording dialog minus 21.2 dB. Parameter. Combo box threshold. 0. Collapsed alt plus P.
Awesome. Tab here.
Value. Slider minus 21.2 dB.
Let's put it down to the smallest possible value, which is minus 54 decibels.
Inf dB. Minus 54.0 dB.
That's great. Let's hit enter.
Unsave.
And let's see how it sounds. Now, this is a demo recording where I'm talking at a relatively normal volume. However, I can also whisper a tiny bit for you. And I can also get a little bit louder than usual. You can definitely notice the pumping effect, which is because the overall signal is much too loud and you're compressing everything, including the background noise, down, which sounds really off, right? So here's another neat little trick that might be useful. In the case that you already know what the peak watcher is, I will quickly show you how the gain reduction metering with peak watcher works. If you don't know what the peak watcher is, I've got 2 videos on my channel which explain how to use it and how to use it with the master track and what it's meant to actually do. And if you're interested in that, then feel free to check out the video description and the info card. I will make sure to post the video there so that you can watch and find out. If you want to use the gain reduction metering with peak watcher, you will open the FX list again.
FX. Track 1 demo recording. List 1 list. VST. ReaComp. Cocos. 1 of 1.
And with ReaComp, the compressor selected, you will press Alt-W to open the peak watcher menu.
Context menu.
And select one peak watcher.
First watcher. Not configured 1.
Let's select that.
Peak watcher. Track demo recording. ReaComp. Level type. Combo box gain reduction dB collapsed.
And usually you'd find things like peak, true peak, RMS and things like that in here. But now that you've selected a compressor, a plugin that does report about the applied gain reduction, you will find gain reduction in here. And that is really, really useful because we can now hit enter.
FX.
And then we can escape out of this.
Unsave.
Reset the first watcher with Alt F10.
Reset.
And play. And I will mute NVDA for this because NVDA will start speaking as soon as it detects gain reduction. And let me tell you, there is a huge gain reduction applied here.
Speech mode off.
Let's play. Now, this is a demo recording where I'm talking at a relatively normal volume. However, I can also whisper a tiny bit for you. And I can also get a little bit louder than usual. Let's bring NVDA up again.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk.
And let's press Alt F11, which will report the left channel of the current peak watcher.
Minus 32.6.
So we had a gain reduction of minus 32 decibels applied, which means that the overall signal got reduced by minus 32.6 decibels. That is really useful to know in the case that you want to know how hard your compressor is actually acting on your signal. Use the peak watcher on it. It's really, really useful. And now that I've demonstrated the compressor to you, let's move on to the limiter. A limiter is essentially a very aggressive compressor. While a compressor gently reduces the dynamic range, a limiter sets a hard ceiling for the signal. Any signal that goes above the threshold is sharply reduced, preventing it from exceeding a certain level. Limiters are often used in mastering to make sure that the final mix doesn't clip and to increase the overall loudness. We are back in the project where I still have the demo track.
1 demo recording 1 item.
I removed the compression plugin now and we want to instantiate the limiter plugin instead. So let's open the FX list.
FX. Track 1 demo recording dialog. List 1 list.
And in here we will press add again. If you already have the add plugin dialog, then you don't need to do that.
Add FX to track 1 demo recording dialog filter.
And we will type ReaLimit, which is REALIMIT. And
list 1 list VST. ReaLimit. Cocos. 1 of 1.
Here we go.
FX.
And just like with ReaComp, we will have some parameters here which are not necessary right now for the real basics. So I will focus the window with F6 and now I will start tabbing.
ReaLimit. ReaLimit grouping threshold dB slider 83.3%. Threshold dB edit selected plus 0.00.
Now that is actually interesting because you can set the threshold to a value that is above 0. And that is a bit confusing compared to all the other situations where you've had sliders and input boxes. The slider will report a percentage value, whereas the input box is obviously a decibel value. I'd always recommend you to select decibels directly. Now, threshold will start at 0 dB by default, ceiling 2. So that means that you don't have a difference between threshold and ceiling, which means that the limiter will just make sure that the ceiling doesn't get crossed by the signal. So everything that is above the ceiling will just be compressed down to the level of the ceiling. So if you are happy with the overall volume of your signal anyway, set threshold and ceiling to the same value, and all the limiter will do then is just make sure that the signal will not get louder than the ceiling. That is the default behavior. However, if you also want to boost your signal, then make sure to set the threshold to a value that is lower than the ceiling. We will, for example, set it to -5.
Flag selection -5.
And let's tab on
Threshold. Ceiling dB slider 100.0%. Ceiling dB edit selected +0.00.
So we've got same behavior. Ceiling has a percentage slider and decibels input box. I will set it to -1 because my signal is actually set to peak at -1 decibels. Here we go. I think everything else in here can be left alone. You don't need this anymore. And now let's see what happens.
Unsaved.
Now this is a demo recording where I'm talking at relatively normal volume. However, I can also whisper a tiny bit for you. And I can also get a little bit louder than usual. What did that do? Whenever you set the threshold to a different value than the ceiling, what ReaLimit will do, it will subtract both values from each other, which will end up in a difference of 4. And what this means is it will boost the overall signal coming in by 4 decibels. And then it will take everything that is above -1, the ceiling, and will compress it so that it will peak at -1 decibels. So now the limiter doesn't just make sure that the signal doesn't get louder than the ceiling, it will also make sure to boost the overall volume of the signal. This, however, can get quite dangerous, as you can imagine, in multiple possible circumstances. One circumstance would be that you set the threshold to a value that is much too low. Let's, for example,
FX.
Go ahead here
Ceiling 1
and set the
threshold 0
threshold to a much lower value.
Value -5 -15 point -6 -15.94.
Let's put it to -16 and see what happens, and it can get a bit louder now. Now this is a demo recording where I'm talking at relatively normal volume. However, I can also whisper a tiny bit for you. And I can also get a little bit louder than usual. That is already kind of loud. If we now drive into the totally exaggerated range, we can pull it down even further.
FX value -60.
Let's put it to -60, which is the lowest possible value. Now this is a demo recording where I'm talking at relatively normal volume. However, I can also whisper a tiny bit for you. And I can also get a little bit louder than usual. That is basically the maximum that ReaLimit can go. It can just go to -60 decibels in terms of threshold. Another circumstance that can really break your neck is if your input signal is too loud. On one hand, that will make the overall output signal loud, really loud. It will sound really loud, but it will never cross -1 decibels. Here we go. Just select the item.
One item selected.
Because I've instantiated ReaLimit as a track FX, that means that the volume of an item gets adjusted before the actual track volume. So I'll be able to dial up the volume of my item and it will just run into my limiter and everything will work as expected.
Item +37.
I just put it up to +40 decibels. Remember, this is gonna get loud. Now this is a demo recording where I'm talking at relatively normal volume. However, I can also whisper a tiny bit for you. And I can also get a little bit louder than usual. This is still capping at -1 decibels, thanks to the limiter. If we remove the limiter now, it would basically clip and maybe even mute the track because it's too loud, and REAPER will prevent me from any hearing damage. So this is what a limiter is used for. It will make sure to boost your signal. It will make sure to cut off frequencies that are getting too loud and will try to make the signal still sound usable. And it will prevent you from clipping, which is really useful in situations like streams or whatever. But the most used scenario for limiters is at the very, very end of a mix and a master. So at the very end of the song, if you've done everything you can to balance the mix to make it sound great, you would still put a master onto the final bus to make sure that your signal doesn't go above a certain ceiling that will limit your song so it doesn't get too loud. That is the most used, although not the only use case for limiters. You can do all kinds of things with limiters, and as usual within the audio world, everything that sounds good is good. So if you find a use case for a limiter that isn't just bus usage at the very end of a master, do it. As long as it sounds good, it's absolutely valid, but using it for buses is really common. However, there's one thing that you should never forget. Even if you put a bus onto a track, if you then set up another track in your project and put a limiter onto that one, and both of them kept at 0 dB, if they are mixed together in the project, they will end up at a higher volume than 0 dB. That is because they will have frequencies that overlap, and even though both of them individually cap at 0 dB, thanks to the frequencies overlapping, they will most likely go above 0 dB if you sum them up. That is just how audio works. If you're not familiar with this and all this sounds confusing to you, let me know in the comment section below the video, and I will make sure to create maybe a podcast episode or maybe a demonstration video where I definitely show you how all this frequency overlapping and this audio volume summing and then all the confusing numbers and everything like that works. So just that you get a feeling of what I'm talking about here.
And that's a wrap. Today we covered the basics of compression and limiting, went through the key parameters of a compressor, and demonstrated how to use ReaComp and ReaLimit in Reaper. I hope you found this video useful. If you've got any questions or topic you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I've never said this before, but ring the bell to get notified about new videos coming out every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.